the barefoot teenage thief who stole banks, planes, cars, and boats. This teenage boy has been pursued by the FBI since he was 14 years old. He has stolen homes, cars, yachts, and even planes without a pilot's license. In total, he has committed 67 crimes, including assaulting police officers and stealing their weapons. This boy lived in real-life GTA, but in reality. He has evaded the FBI for years, moving from city to city and island to island, and they haven't been able to catch him. This is a hard-to-believe story, but it is true. And you will see this through the crazy events in the story. Our story today is about this boy named Colton Harris Moore. He lived the craziest teenage life in history. I don't think any other boy has lived through the level of madness that Colton did. It all started from scratch. Colton lived in a bad house. His mother was an alcoholic. His father was a drug addict. And after a while, they separated, and his father abandoned them, leaving them with nothing. He did not provide them with any financial support, and their situation was very difficult. Their house was an old and dilapidated caravan from the inside and outside. Colton and his mother lived in an island called Camano, located in the state of Washington in the United States. This state has several islands, including Camano Island, where Colton and his mother lived in a big town. Colton lived a life of poverty with his mother, who never cared about him. Her only concern was how to get money to buy alcohol. Colton suffered from hunger because his mother did not provide him with anything to eat. When he couldn't find anything to eat, he started stealing, entering stores and stealing some things, especially food and drinks. But due to his lack of experience, he was caught and arrested. For a day or two in juvenile detention centers, which are not like prisons, but rather like schools with security guards and monitoring. Colton had many behavioral problems in school and was frequently suspended for days. But his mother did not care. When the school administration tried to contact her, she did not care either. At the age of 14, Colton continued to get into trouble and steal. Gradually, he began to steal from homes and learned how to break locks and where homeowners hide spare keys. When he broke into homes, the first thing he did was to open the fridge and steal food and drinks. Then he would sit on the couch, watch TV, and play PlayStation. He always targeted empty homes whose owners were on vacation or traveling. Many homes on the island were vacation homes, meaning their owners only visited during holidays, which helped him stay unnoticed. He felt comfortable and stole at ease, sometimes staying in the homes he wanted to steal from for a few days. He would take a shower, change his clothes, and treat the house as if it were his own. Sometimes there would be a car in the home, which he would take and use. When he finished his errand, he would return the car and clean it with gasoline. When he wanted to leave the house, he would take anything valuable he could, sometimes finding a safe to break into and taking all the money and jewelry inside. He would take all the electronics, including laptops and PlayStations, and even the frozen food. You may wonder why he would take the car and return it filled with gas and clean it afterward, only to steal gold and jewelry. Colton thought that the things he stole were insured against theft, and the owners could find compensation. In other words, he thought he wasn't hurting the homeowners. But that's not true, because even if the homeowners has insurance, they still have to deal with insurance companies to get compensated for the stolen items. So Colton was trying to convince himself that stealing was all good and that he had a conscience. He stopped going to his mom's crib and started living solo in the houses he broke into or in a tent he set up in the woods. He moved his tent around from place to place and hit up different houses and stores to steal whatever he wanted. At the end of the day, he'd go back to his tent with all the stuff he stole, money, credit cards, food, whatever he felt like taking. One of Colton's goals at the time was to hit up a fire station and steal a thermal imaging camera that works with infrared radiation. Firefighters use these cameras in rescue operations to see if there are people behind walls. Colton stole this camera so he could find out if there were people in the houses he wanted to rob before breaking in. The camera helped him do his ops better and be more secure. And he also stole a telescope as part of his loot. So Colton bought a night vision goggles that soldiers use in the army for $6,000, paid for it with one of the credit cards he stole, and kept living like this for months. He lived in the middle of the woods and moved from place to place on the island, hitting up houses and stores to steal from. A lot of reports about thefts started popping up, and the cops were working on the case to solve the mystery. They suspected Colton and started looking for him until they identified him as the thief through their investigations and records. He had been caught for theft multiple times before, and they had his fingerprints, information, and a photo for him. With his disappearance from school and his mother's house, they linked him to the ongoing thefts. He was the main suspect from the beginning. But the problem was that they couldn't catch him. They started distributing this picture in the media and announced that he was wanted. So now he's wanted and became known in the middle of the island, which isn't a small place. It's a big island with several areas and more than one town, and it can reach the size of a city. At this time, Colton was increasing his arsenal and was buying tools and devices to help him survive in the woods, such as a generator. He would order these things online and go to people's houses to pick them up and have them delivered there. He had a lot of boldness, which ultimately led to his downfall. In 2007, when he was 15 years old, he broke into a house and decided to stay there for the night. He turned on the lights in the house, which caught the attention of the neighbors, because they knew that the owners were traveling and shouldn't have any lights on. They called the cops, and the police were ready for him. It's possible that Colton was the culprit, and as a result, a large number of police officers surrounded all the entrances and exits of the house. They entered the house and found Colton sleeping on the bed. They woke him up and take him to jail, where he was sentenced to 4 years in a juvenile detention center for 21 crimes that he had committed. In the detention center, Colton was calm and never got into any trouble, unlike the other inmates. He occupied himself with useful things like reading books and drawing, and he was interested in aviation and airplanes. He drew airplanes, and you might want to keep that in mind. Colton was very committed to following the rules in jail and attended discussion sessions and classes. It was clear that he wanted to improve himself, and he talked to the supervisors about how he would return to studying and go to college when he got out of jail. The supervisors didn't know that this was all an act, because Colton knew that if he behaved well in jail, he would be transferred to a lighter prison or a detention center. After 10 months of good behavior in jail, Colton was transferred to a detention center that looked like a house or a school building with minimal security and surveillance. He was then moved to a center with even less security, and there he began to observe the guards and security measures in place. One night, he quickly took his belongings, opened a window, and escaped from the detention center. The center didn't have a fence or an external check, and Colton's fitness made it easy for him to jump and escape quickly, becoming a fugitive once again. In 2008, at the age of 17, Colton returned to his old life in the woods, living in a tent and occasionally robbing homes and stores. In one instance, he robbed a small bank. Colton's agility and strength were very high, giving him the ability to sneak, jump, and invade quickly and lightly. In one of his robberies, he broke into a store that sold equipment and entered through a second-story window. He took the tools he needed from the store, with money inside. Colton broke into the safe and stole over $3,000. The police were searching for him, but couldn't find him. One night, Colton broke into a house and found a powerful sports Mercedes-Benz car, the most luxurious and beautiful car he had ever seen. He stole the car and drove it at a crazy speed of 200 kilometers per hour. At that moment, a police car passed by, and the police started to chase him as he drove recklessly. Colton saw the police following him and exited the main street, hitting the car into a tree and running towards the woods. The police surrounded the area and searched for Colton, but they couldn't find him. The robberies continued, and each time he stole from a new place. In one of his robberies, Colton stole a machine gun from a police car, becoming armed and dangerous. The police intensified their search for him in all areas. In police cars, with police dogs and helicopter support, all these efforts failed to capture Colton. Even the FBI was involved in the search and investigations for him. The police announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could find him, and the police and bounty hunters were now on the lookout for him. Colton, on the other hand, was living in another world, planning something that no one could imagine. As we previously discussed, Colton had a love for airplanes, and after escaping from prison, he bought aviation manuals and a laptop. He started playing flight simulation games to learn how to fly. His ultimate dream was to steal an airplane and fly it. After reading aviation manuals and playing flight simulation games for a while, he started to monitor a local airport on an island. This small airport was used by people who owned small planes, and Colton was sometimes able to sneak into the airport, steal the user guide, and run away. He read these manuals with great passion and learned everything he needed to know about flying. One night, he decided to break into the airport, went to the hangar with planes, and started looking for a plane he could steal. Searching for any suitable aircraft to steal and fly, Colton identified the appropriate plan and pulled it outside onto the runway. He began moving the plane on the runway and flew it. Imagine a teenager flying a plane just by reading manuals. It is unbelievable. He was a very brilliant and daring person. Someone might ask why the radar didn't detect him. If the plane is flying up to 18,000 feet above the ground, it is difficult for the radar to detect it. It is the same altitude as helicopters and small private planes. In his excitement, Colton didn't notice the fuel tank, which was close to empty. He realized he had to land the plane, which was the most dangerous phase. He had no choice but to perform an emergency landing in an open area, which resulted in the plane crashing into the ground. The amazing thing is that he emerged from the crash unharmed, with only a few bruises, and continued on his way to the forest, leaving the wreckage of the plane behind. When the police were informed on the plane theft, they didn't suspect that Colton could be involved in this crime. They suspected he was a drug dealer. In those days, any theft that occurred at a house or store, Colton was the main suspect. But stealing a plane was not something anyone expected for him. Colton didn't fly very far, just a few kilometers, because the plane didn't have enough fuel. He remained on the same island and didn't leave it. The search operations continued, and at times they got very close to him. Once they found a tent and raided it, but he sensed them approaching and left the tent before they could catch him. He watched them from a distance as they seized all of his belongings, including the aviation manuals. This raised the police's suspicions that Colton may have been behind the plane theft, especially since the models he was reading about were the same model that was stolen. On one occasion, Colton went back to the airport and stole another plane. This time, his destination was a neighboring island belonging to the state of Washington. He landed smoothly on this island, and here he went and burglarized the supermarket. The surveillance camera captured images of him stealing from the store while holding a large iron rod in his hand. Colton found a forklift in the store's warehouse, used it to lift the ATM, pulled it from the wall, broke it open, and took the money inside. This was not the only theft Colton committed. He hit more than one store, and the cameras captured his fingerprints everywhere. The police came to know that Colton was on this island, and they linked him to the plane theft. His story was all over the news and media, and people were shocked at how he learned to fly planes and how a teenage boy could do all of that. Colton became famous among people, even outside the island. Can you imagine that he had fans? And they started calling him the Barfoot Thief because most of the footage captured by the surveillance cameras showed him barefoot. The reason is unknown, but he thought he could move more stealthily that way. Without intending to, people started talking about Colton on Facebook and YouTube, and some even made songs about him. Some drew pictures of him on walls. And the matter got so big that people began printing t-shirts and selling them. Colton was happy with his fame to the extent that in one of his thefts, he broke into a supermarket, stole as usual, but this time he took chalk and drew footprints as if to accept the Barefoot Thief nickname his fans had given him. After that, Colton decided to leave the island because the police and FBI were pursuing him relentlessly, and he was under surveillance at local airports. So he decided to take another mode of transportation. This time he stole a boat and sailed out of the island to Canada, crossing the maritime border without being seen by the Coast Guard. There he met two people on the street, became friends with them, and they didn't know who this boy was. After a few days, they saw a news report about an American fugitive and realized that it was the same boy they had met a few days earlier. After feeling that he was no longer being watched, Colton stole another boat and returned to the United States. There he began stealing cars again. But the smart thing he did was not to use the car for a long time and not to refuel at gas stations because they have surveillance cameras that could track him. He used the car until it ran out of fuel, and then he stole another one. Colton continued doing this until he reached the local airport in Idaho, which is close to Washington state. He stole another plane and flew to Grandy Falls, Washington. When he arrived in the area, he saw a large empty space and decided to land there. However, he was surprised to find that the space was not empty, but was full of cut-down tree stumps. At that moment, he couldn't change his mind about landing and had to land on the stumps, causing the plane to crash violently. But Colton survived the crash again without any serious injuries. He went to the forest again, but this forest was not deserted, and some people saw him. The plane crashed, and among those who found it was a man who worked cutting down trees. When he went to the plane, he didn't find anyone inside, and the police were immediately notified. The police and FBI, along with helicopters, arrived and began searching from the air. As the situation had become dangerous and was considered a serious security threat, these forces closed the area and set up checkpoints on a wide scale. During the search operations, they received a report from a family in the area that they had spotted a strange person among the trees near their home. The police immediately went there and started searching the area, and indeed, Colton was hiding there. He was surprised to see the police and police dogs looking for him and quickly left his belongings and ran away. The police seized his belongings and found a bag containing approximately $20,000 in cash and a camera with selfies of Colton. Despite all this searching, the police were unable to catch him again. It's hard to imagine that after all this pursuit and surveillance, Colton was able to steal a plane for the 5th time. Truly remarkable. His destination was Orcas Island, which is also an island belonging to Washington. This time the landing was better than the previous time, and the plane did not crash. While on this island, Colton also stole from several homes and businesses. After that, he stopped and ceased his movements for several months because he felt that the pursuit on him had intensified, so he decided to take a break. Some people expected that he had died or drowned in the sea, or that something had happened to him because it was unusual for him to remain quiet for a long time. On San Juan Island, one of the islands in Washington, they were surprised to find a large footprint on the harbor and a boat missing. This was Colton's announcement, as he took the boat and went to Lopez Island, where he stole another boat and then returned to his original island, where he stole another boat and then returned to his original island, Camano Island. The problem was that the island's residents hated him, and some were even ready to kill him. They held meetings and competed to see how they could stop him at this limit, and they started organizing nightly patrols to search for him. All of them armed, even the airplane owners who sat next to the windows in case they saw anything resembling his plane. However, Colton continued to evade capture and steal boats. Colton didn't care about any of that and stole a car and fled to another city on the island. He began moving from city to city, and one day he sent a message to an animal care center saying that he had passed by them and had extra money, which he hoped they would use to care for the animals. He left the message in the mailbox with $100. After that, Colton decided to expand and leave Washington. So he moved from state to state, stealing a new car each time. During this journey, he broke into several different airports looking for a suitable plane. The authority didn't know anything about him. Thousands of kilometers across America, and no one knew where he was. Finally, after 9 states and stealing 11 cars, he arrived at the airport and the plane he wanted in Indiana. He watched the airport from behind the trees from a distance and waited for the right moment. He didn't need to move carefully because he was far from Washington. No one here imagined that his plane would take off. He took one of the planes that suited him, and this was Colton's last flight. He flew south to the Bahamas from an independent country, meaning he had left America. When he tried to land, some people saw him circling the plane 4 or 5 times and trying to land in the same way as before, landing in an open area. This time, the plane did not break as badly as before. And as soon as he got off the plane, he headed towards the woods. The police came and inspected the plane and found out that it was American, so they informed the American authorities. The authorities gave information to the Bahamian Islands about Colton, and it became certain that he had arrived in the Bahamas. The news spread on television and in the news, and the first thing Colton did was break into a store and a restaurant, stealing money, food, and things he needed before retreating into the woods. He spent his time going to the beach, swimming, and enjoying the beautiful scenery. He then stole a car and went to a major city on the island, where he began to explore the area and watch the harbor for a while. He found a man who parked his boat and went to his car, leaving the key in the car, and went to a nearby restaurant. Colton broke into the car while the man was in the restaurant, took the boat key, and ran to the harbor, stealing the boat and going to another island in the Bahamas. He stayed there for a week, hiding and trying not to be seen. Sometimes passing by restaurants and cafes and seeing his picture on TV. He tried to hide his face and wore things to disguise himself. After getting tired of the situation, he decided to drive another boat and stayed at sea for a while. Then he went near the harbor, and there were 2 guys nearby. He showed off his boat to them, and one of them recognized him, but pretended not to know him. This guy knew that there was a reward of $1,000 for whoever found Colton and wanted to capture him. Colton told him not to act stupid and call the police and let them come and catch him. He wanted to have some fun with them and enjoy himself a little. The other guy took his phone and called his friend, who wanted to come and chase Colton with them. When Colton saw this guy holding his phone and talking to his friend, he said, "Okay, you call the police? Goodbye, I'm leaving." He then went away in the boat. Moments later, their friend and a group of his friends came to chase Colton. The 6 guys boarded the boat and started chasing Colton. They found him standing in the boat, not moving and looking at them with a smile, as if he was challenging them. As soon as they got close to him, he started racing them, as if he was playing a game of racing with them. He enjoyed the race, but at one point, one of them pulled out his gun and pointed it at Colton. Colton then performed maneuvers that made the boat tilt and splashed them with water. The boat owners said that the water came into his eyes and he lost track, and the boat went in the direction of the peaceful Colton. Colton quickly moved away from them, and the boat owner said that he knows how to maneuver the boat. Colton knew how to maneuver the boats very well. It was clear he was very skilled. He managed to play around with them before escaping and heading towards another nearby harbor. Directly behind the harbor was a house with a guard who was observing the events from afar. There were 2 boats, one with a long boy and the other with a group of young men chasing after Colton, shouting as if they were at war. The guard thought about calling the police, but then saw the boy's boat come towards the harbor at great speed. The guard signaled for him to slow down, but Colton quickly stopped the boat and jumped off, running towards the harbor's pier. He reached the guard and was watching the house and asked him what was going on. Colton said they were trying to kill him, and the guard asked who wanted to kill him. After catching his breath, the guard tried to ask more questions, but Colton quickly ran past him and into the trees, running towards the house. The guard chased after him, but Colton disappeared into the bushes around the house. The guard immediately called the police in the area, and he knew one of them. The boy in the boat said he believed Colton was hiding among the bushes, and the police quickly gathered all their men and began surrounding the area. Colton couldn't escape because the police was closed and not open, but he was not an easy target and tried to hide among the bushes, and then went to the harbor in the opposite direction, calmly swam towards the boat and got on it. There were many people and boat owners in the harbor who saw a boat moving slowly with its lights off, wondering why its lights were off. Colton suddenly moved quickly and left the harbor, and people realized it might be him. They informed the police, but the police did not have boats. Some of them borrowed boats and chased after Colton. Colton was ahead of them by a distance, but in a moment he began to see behind him and could see the distance between him and the police officers. Suddenly he collided with an extension of sand outside the island, and his boat got stuck in the sand. Colton tried to get his boat out, but the boat's propellers hit the sand, and he kept trying and trying. The police came closer and aimed their weapons at him. Colton did something strange. He raised the gun he had with him and pointed it at his head, threatening to shoot himself. The police told him to put down his weapon, but Colton kept shouting that he couldn't back down. At the same time, he tried to use his other hand to pull the boat out of the sand. Finally, after 2.5 years of escaping from the police, Colton was arrested. When they arrived at the harbor, people gathered and began to take pictures of Colton, but he hid his face so as not to be filmed. The Bahamian police transported Colton by plane to face trial in the Bahamas. However, he was only fined $30,000 for entering the country illegally. The reason for this was that they wanted to hand him over to the American authorities as soon as possible. The second time Colton appeared, he was in prison wearing a white jumpsuit. After being handed over to the United States, Colton was tried in 2010, and his trial continued for several months. At that time, he was 19 years old and no longer a minor. He was facing 67 charges in 3 different countries: the United States, Canada, and the Bahamas. The sentence he faced was up to 30 years in prison. However, he was lucky to have a lawyer named John Henry Brown. He was known for taking on the most difficult cases and defending even the most hopeless defendants. Brown convinced Colton to confess to all the charges against him. But at the same time, he drew the judge's attention to Colton's childhood and the hardship he had faced. The judge and the officials sympathized with him, and he was sentenced to only 7 years in prison. However, he did not complete the full 7 years and was imprisoned. Colton was released on parole after serving 5 years in prison. He was released in 2016 at the age of 25. The amazing thing is that he worked as an assistant in the lawyer's office who defended him. Of course, it is difficult for a person with a criminal record to find a job. So it is great that his lawyer employed him. Colton did interviews and said that he hates the person he was in the past and wants to leave that person behind. He said he wants to organize his life and look for opportunities like giving lectures and sharing his life experience with people. This person may have lived the craziest teenage years of anyone on this planet. Imagine he stole houses, shops, banks, and planes and escaped from prison. He did everything imaginable. I can't imagine anyone else doing more than this. If you know someone, please tell us about them in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to stay updated on new content.